This is a talk sponsored by the Center for Data Ethics and Justice and co-sponsored by the Department of Anthropology and the Bioethics program. So I hope that you very likely found out about it through one of those venues, and very much appreciate that you're here today. We're really honored to have Sareeta Amrute here with us today. For those of you who might not be familiar with her work, she is, first of all, Director of Research at Data and Society. And if you aren't familiar with that, you should really have a look at what they're doing. It's an institute. I'll call it an institute if that's fine. I don't know what you officially call yourself.
It calls itself an institute.
It does it? Okay, great. An institute in New York City that, at least from my perspective, but I think also Samuel and Felipe have really looked to them as a model for what we could be doing here at the university in terms of developing the Center of Data Ethics and Justice. And so we really appreciate the work that they've been doing and thank them for the interactions that we've had over the past year for helping us think about this. So Sareeta's the Director of Research there. She's also an Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Washington, Seattle. Her research is focused on the integration of humans and technologies, with special emphasis on the race, class, and gendered implications of these relationships. Her recent book is entitled Encoding Race, Encoding Class, Indian IT Workers in Berlin, an ethnography which examines the relationship between labor, Indian technical work, and migration regimes in global corporate coding work. The book was awarded the 2017 Diane Forsyth Prize in the Anthropology of Science, Technology, and Medicine. And currently, Sareeta is developing an illustrated guide to ethics in technology industries called Future Proof Code, an illustrated guide to techno-ethics. So again, please let's welcome her.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I wanted to extend a special thank you to Jarrett for inviting me, Felipe for also inviting me and showing me around your beautiful campus and being a great collaborator, and Samuel, who made sure I got to the places I needed to go today. Before we begin, I wanted to start by simply acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land we are on today, the Monacan Nation, and to pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And on those same lines of thinking through the kinds of relationships we want to bring with us today when we think about ethics, I also wanted to mention my own elders and our traditions. Today is the 6th day of Navratri, which is a celebration of the goddess. And among other things, this is a celebration of harvest, the harvest moon, and also Adi Parashakti, which we could read as a radical act of self-creation. So in the spirit of all these other voices, I thank you for hosting me and acknowledge their presence with us today. So I'm going to talk to you today about ethics. I should say that unlike Jarrett, I'm not really an expert in the field of ethics, but given my ongoing interest in thinking about the tech industry from the standpoint of migration and labor, and given all of the ethical concerns involved in the tech industry, I've lately turned my attention to ways we can approach thinking about ethics, and also my attention to a critique of how ethics is traditionally approached in those industries. So I'm going to do a little bit of a combination for you today of reading off this paper and also talking about the slides. And I think that also represents my positioning as both a professor of anthropology and a director of research at Data and Society, where on the one hand I'm trained to pay very careful attention to close readings, words, forms of exposition, but on the other hand, I'm increasingly drawn to different modes of more public-facing presentation. So I hope that mixed genre appeals to you and comes off well. In early 2018, someone hung posters in San Francisco's municipal transportation, the BART and the Muni, with the following message. This is this image here on your left. U.S. tech workers, your companies think you are expensive, undeserving, and expendable. Congress fixed H-1B law so companies must seek and hire U.S. workers. While the poster bore union and leftist symbols, the raised fist, black and red colors, the message was anything but progressive. This group lobbied to end immigrant visa programs and for the protection of white-collar jobs for American citizens. Faced with this duplicitous messaging, a workers' rights organization called the Tech Workers Coalition created its own poster, which is this figure on your right. They circulated this poster electronically and made it available for download, ready to be plastered over the first poster. I am interested in the ethics of the Tech Worker Coalition response and how it demonstrates a political awareness that exceeds how tech ethics are normally conceived of in Silicon Valley. We might call this a radical ethics, which, according to anthropologist Nesargi Dave, comprises 3 elements. First, problematizing social norms. Second, inventing alternatives to those norms. And third, creatively practicing those newly minted relational possibilities. The second poster does all 3. It critiques a dominant frame of anti-immigrant sentiment. It produces an alternative narrative, which is the narrative of making San Francisco livable for all its residents. And it uses creative practices of mimicry to explore these new relational possibilities. Yet, while Dave's account describes the properties of radical ethics, understood as the generation of new frameworks for action based on critique, it does not provide a pathway for understanding how those frames come to be. In other words, how do people and groups become oriented towards the need for problematization and alternatives? What grounds the practice of creative possibility? I turn towards feminist affect theory in conversation with queer, postcolonial, and decolonizing science and technology studies, and in particular, feminist theories of attunement to explore these questions. These disciplines have developed a relational approach to ethics that asks, whose knowledge counts, and in what ways in technical domains? To give you a sense of some of the scholars who work in this field, I'm thinking with Sandra Harding, Donna Haraway, Paula Chakravarti, Anita Chan, Kara Keeling, Ruha Benjamin, Kathleen Stewart, and of course Jarrett Zygon. Though he may not think of himself as a feminist affect theorist, his foundational work on attunement and fidelity has deeply influenced my thinking, and I would argue that he is, in fact, a feminist affect theorist in some ways. Yay! Okay, good. I will discuss 3 areas of attunement in the rest of this paper. Corporeal, or attunement to bodies and their placement relative to political discourse, labor histories, and technical infrastructures. Glitchy, or attunements to imperfections in social and technical systems. And sovereign, or attention to what makes some forms of life killable and other forms of life worth protecting. An attunement, according to Kathleen Stewart, is an atmosphere for living where actors come to feel that something is happening or becoming fixed. As she affirms, attunements describe both an orientation among people, technologies, and environments, and an opportunity for people to try to create new potential ways of living through things. In this latter active practice of attunement, the senses are trained through human actors and technical systems, both of which prompt different kinds of ethical engagements. I think of these attunements as training the senses producing an embodied practice of recognizing and then being able to act in a technical situation, akin to a pianist who does not only produce congealed labor, but does, for Marx, produce and satisfy our musical ear, and even to a certain extent, produces the latter. To return to our posters, battles such as these show the kinds of politics that can emerge from a very particular, and I would argue not very widespread, kind of attunement, to the racialization of visa-backed coders from India and China, and to a lesser extent Latin America and Eastern Europe in contemporary American politics. I will unpack the possibilities and limits of such an attunement to bodies and their political economies in a moment, but first it might be worthwhile to show you a different use of the term ethics. The following way of describing ethics is the dominant one in Silicon Valley, and I should mention I'm using Silicon Valley broadly, not just Silicon Valley in California, but the various tech industries that are located across the globe, and in a sense borrow forms of ethical thinking from one another. Trying to speak up so everyone can hear. So these dominant frames of ethics seem to increase with each new scandal over data privacy, surveillance, election manipulation, and worker displacement. Some of the most visible responses to date, such as that of the Ethical OS, which is, I'm showing you an image from their webpage here, created by the Institute for the Future, a nonprofit think tank located in Palo Alto, California, distill ethics into a series of tests that can be administered by companies' leadership teams to future-proof their products. While such an effort emphasizes the long-term effects of digital technologies, they provide little guidance, apart from declaration by company fiat, on how ethical concerns might be incorporated into technical processes. These approaches, moreover, treat ethics as a series of mandates from the top to be developed by CEOs and applied by engineers. A robust technoethics requires that these top-down trends be reversed. The Ethical OS, OS standing for Operating System, is a laudable attempt to bring a discussion of ethics into the boardrooms of tech firms. The toolkit identifies major areas of concern in the development of new technologies. That's what you're looking at here. Ranging from predictive sentencing of prisoners based on racial and gender markers to the use of artificial intelligence to produce fake videos. It then asks companies to consider how their products in development might contribute to any of these 8 risk zones. Once a company has identified an area of risk, the toolkit guides it towards strategies to assuage that risk. These strategies include requiring students of computer science and related fields to take a training sequence in tech ethics, developing a Hippocratic Oath for data scientists, paying employees for identifying major social risks of new products, developing metrics to gauge the health of technology platforms, and requiring a license for software developers. While this approach has several advantages, it also reproduces the problems that have produced harmful technologies in the first place. The Ethical OS has the advantage of showing technologists directly how they might take responsibility for the things that they make. However, such rules-based approaches do little to solve the underlying problem of producing the conditions necessary to change the belief in technological instrumentality. The toolkit provides little guidance on how to know what problems the technology embodies or how to imagine technologies that organize life otherwise, in part because it fails to address who should be asked when it comes to defining ethical dilemmas. The approach, which addresses only 3 groups, trustees or board members, engineers and designers, and computer science professors, reinforces narrow definitions of who gets to make decisions about technologies and what counts as a technological problem. Formulating technoethics through rules sidesteps discussions about how such things as necessary technical and ethical knowledge are evaluated and who gets to make these valuations. Post-colonial and decolonizing feminist theory, on the other hand, moves the discussion of ethics from establishing decontextualized rules to developing practices to train socio-technical systems, algorithms and their human makers, for instance, to begin with the material and embodied situations in which these systems are entangled, and include from the very start histories of race, gender, and dehumanization. Note that a discussion of the politics of H-1B visa holders and the need to reform their status would fall completely outside this particular formulation of ethics, which anthropologist Leslie Sharp, in the biomedical context, has recently called the parameters of what one may do or may not do in the lab, or in this case, in the design process. Such a turn to rules would not capture the kinds of politics necessary in the current moment, which is broader than tech design domains narrowly conceived. For a project on technoethics, the idea of attunements has a further advantage. It proceeds from all the factors that go into creating a particular alertness to a situation. These factors include social relations, affective, political, and climactic winds, and the labor that both humans and technical systems do. As a mode of pursuing ethics, attunements propose recurring attention to changing socio-technical environments. Sorry, what? Water? That would be great, if it's possible. Thank you, Jared. Yeah. Much of what I'm presenting you today is forthcoming in an article that will be published in a special issue dedicated to digital laborers in the journal Feminist Review, which is a British journal, which means you'll have lots of fun with British spelling, as I did when I was, if you read it, as I did when I was writing the piece. So to return to a minute to the case of H-1B visas in the United States and visa holders from India. In my research on coders from South Asia living in Berlin, Seattle, and San Francisco, I found that the continually changing visa regimes regulating coding labor contributed to programmers from India pursuing several different migration routes simultaneously. The protagonists of my ethnography would move from one project within a firm to another in order to extend the length of their visas, even while exploring possible temporary work visas for other countries should this strategy prove ineffectual. This pursuing of risk unfolded against an increasingly precarious visa regime, where, for instance, in the latest change to visa law, the U.S. administration rescinded the H-4 visa, allowing spouses of visa-backed workers to also seek employment. And that happened in 2018. Programmers from India adopted to moving from one bat to another and, within their jobs, to taking their social and technical tacit knowledge and making it available to the firm to monetize. Some of these strategies have yielded an entire industry to meet them, such as courses in cultural streamlining that train migrant tech workers to look, smell, and talk in the right way to be appealing to employers. These kinds of attunements shape a self practiced in the art of taking chances as a way of life, both to capitalize on qualities of personhood and to simply survive. Within these attunements, risk is something somatized as a way of being. Thank you. Programmers from India come to embody risk as a habit of working to fit themselves into legal regimes that are designed to keep them moving from one side of labor to another. Rima, a programmer I got to know in Seattle, exemplifies this kind of orientation. She is currently enrolled in a school in California so that she can have a work visa, but she lives in Seattle. While she is studying, her visa allows her to work, and she uses this loophole to maintain her job in Seattle. The MBA program she's enrolled in is entirely remote. In fact, this program was set up to cater to programmers like her, and she found it while looking for jobs in the United States from India. She pays them about $4,000 US a semester for these barely existent courses. While the university has a campus and does run in-person classes, their online offerings require minimal work and result in certificates in various programming languages and business administration. Rima has to travel to California twice a year to attend on-campus seminar to secure her place in the program. So in other words, this is a kind of diploma mill that's set up entirely to cater to people who need a visa in order to stay and work in the country. And they are employed by big brand name firms who are using these visa loopholes to give them jobs that aren't really paid at market rate. And we can talk through all the ways that happens, but it's primarily because they're always temporary, and so they don't have adequate benefits packages attached to them. And all of the people who work in these temporary jobs, their status, their ability to stay in the country is directly related to either their employer or staying enrolled in these MBA programs to which they just keep paying $4,000 every semester or more. Okay, so there's an entire industry that's built up to maintain an entire class of laborers who actually produce tech economies. And that's the kind of attunement that's missing in the first poster we saw that really plays a racialized politics of natives and foreigners as its main card, right? So my question is, how do you tune in to the reality of the material conditions of migrant labor on the ground? Mainstream discourse might frame RIMA as a materialist scofflaw, yet an attunement to how Silicon Valley companies depend on subjects like RIMA and to the particular histories of visa laws would allow for a critique of those discourses to occur. I call attention to people, atmosphere, and technical infrastructures a corporeal attunement, an attunement to bodies and how they are placed in a particular field. As Rima's story indicates, H-1B and other temporary workers embody a habitus of risk and speculation born of the appetite of U.S. firms to outsource labor to vendors and the continuing shifting landscape of visa laws the world over. And in fact, if you talk to any of your colleagues who are here on a student visa or a similar visa, they will tell you endless stories of trying to negotiate US, UK, and so on visa regimes, which are changing rapidly. The next attunement I will discuss with you comes from glitches. Yeah, a little bit of humor is good, I think, in the middle of the talk. Okay. A glitch is a break in a digital system where business as usual pauses, comes undone, and shows its imperfections. Corporations like Google and Facebook often use the idea of the glitch to claim that their systems occasionally malfunction but are otherwise blameless. However, beyond the corporate discourse of fixable glitches, the idea of the glitch indexes hidden memories, unrecognized populations, and latent ideologies within technological systems. A glitch, as Kara Keeling notes, is a temporary malfunction with the capacity to reorder things that can, perhaps, make what is glitchy soar into unpredictable relations. The theory of the glitch, developed through transgender and queer rewritings of code, can identify incoherent identities in all their acts of resistance and love and redirect them towards new possibilities. These misdirections, as Shaka McLaughlin points out, can turn the black box of unquestioned technologies into a black box of desire organized around expansive world-making projects. I will discuss two examples of glitchy attunements. The first is an attunement to glitch as tragedy, so not this, we're not there yet. The second might be called an attunement to farce. In my first narrative, attunements reveal how environmental waste is a precondition of corporate coding economies. In the second, attunements reveal the cracks in the kinds of masks that those in power don in the name of those they govern. I met Millie in 2017. She was a young programmer working at the Microsoft campus in Redmond who used an analysis of glitches to achieve a small but significant change in her workplace surroundings. Millie grew up in Oregon, went to school in Portland, and began working as a designer for accessible technologies on Microsoft's Xbox team. She was working on a project to help visually impaired gamers interact with the popular video game consoles. Millie herself is visually impaired. She can see very well at close distances. and what was in front of her, but has very poor peripheral vision. Her abilities made programming a very rewarding job, and Microsoft's campus was well adapted to meet her needs. Millie would eat at the closest cafeteria to her workstation every day and order lunch from one of several stations with multiple food choices. Sitting with her friends over lunch, Millie gradually realized she was missing something. The clink of glasses and the metallic clang of silverware on ceramic plates. The campus cutlery was all plastic, the coffee cups all paper. For Millie, the loss of sound was a breakdown in her otherwise well-designed workday. It stood out as a glitch in her meaningful work focused on disabled populations. Millie did a few quick calculations, estimating the number of cups thrown away every day in the cafeteria. She then went on to investigate how the environmental cost of throwing away paper cups and plastic utensils compared with the water costs of washing dishes from the cafeteria, which is a very local calculation because Seattle, in fact, has abundant water. It would be a different calculation for a different place. Millie then began a year-long campaign to replace paper and plastic with washable cups, plates, and utensils in her office cafeteria, which was successful after she was able to get support of over 100 other workers in her building. Millie followed the glitch in her workplace, revealed through her attunement to the convivial sound of clinking dishware. So in other words, because she is visually impaired, for her it was the sound that really brought to mind what was missing in this space. And she noticed it because of this glitch, right? Her love for that sound brought attention to waste in the cafeteria in comparison to the ethic of inclusion in her disability gaming project. So she noticed a contradiction there. They were doing a really good job with the Xbox and a really bad job in the cafeteria. She accomplished this attunement by centering her own glitch in making a world for herself through listening, so valorizing that sensibility. The glitch can also function as a powerful map of failure and as a sign of the assumptions and power relations built into systems. Now we're going here to Zuck memes. If you're not familiar, it's pretty interesting. You can find Zuck memes on the site Reddit. Up there is how you find it. Okay. To demonstrate the range of glitchy attunements, I will end my discussion of glitch with comedy. Zuck memes is a collection of humorous images and text located on Reddit, an online discussion board. As the name implies, all of these images, called memes, I'm assuming some familiarity with memes in the room, use pictures of Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of the social media company Facebook. Meme creators on Zuck memes add captions, change the images, and cut and splice pictures and videos together to mock certain aspects of Zuckerberg's self-presentation. Zuck memes' contributions peaked during Zuckerberg's congressional testimony resulting from a corporate debacle, widely known as the Cambridge Analytica scandal, in which a researcher was allowed to collect data from users and friends of users through an application offered on Facebook. This data was then sold to the political media company Cambridge Analytica, which then tried to use it to influence the US presidential election. Okay, a familiar story, I think, still. Zuck memes, however, did not focus on the scandal itself. Contributors instead mocked Zuckerberg's affect. Numerous memes riffed on his robotic behavior, including Zuckerberg's obsessive water drinking during his testimony. Chapo Trap House, which is the unit that produced this particular meme, is a well-known left-wing progressive US-based podcast. They took an image of Mark Zuckerberg posted on his Facebook feed and added narration that represents him as a replicant, android, or cyborg, not human but masquerading as one. Several other memes point out that Zuckerberg's performance during the testimony was as a malfunctioning AI. The water, the half smiles, and awkward demeanor pointing out the glitch in his programming. A meme, as Anshao Mina points out, suggests is an in-joke that temporarily suspends hierarchies. As such, comedy can reveal fractures along which socio-technical systems split open in different ways for different participants. Within the context of a monopoly on media content, memes provide a rupture in hegemonic representations through participatory creative media. As Mina argues, the creativity of memes can rupture seemingly unyielding presentations of a singular point of view. In the case of Zuck memes, that point of view is represented by corporate technocultures that insist on deflecting ethical problems in favor of user participation on their sites and for the sake of monetizing data collected from users for advertising. Zuck memes tune into the glitches in this presentation by means of the idea of a misprogrammed or failing AI. As comedy, these images can be interpreted in myriad ways. And of course, the content on this site can also lead in directions that we would consider highly unethical. It could lead to right-wing critique of the same thing. So there is always a kind of ambiguity around these attunements. They can lead in many different directions. These Zuck memes put on display the overblown power we've given to engineers to shape our social, technical, and ecological worlds. The final attunement I will discuss involves questions of sovereignty. There is a rich literature on sovereignty from which I take inspiration to discuss how technologies help decide which bodies come to be recognized as killable. And I'm thinking here with Agamben, Achille Mbembe, and Judith Butler. The sovereign attunement that I discuss with you today is from a group called Data for Black Lives. This is their website. They run many different types of projects, and they're well worth your time. Investigating them is well worth your time. The movement Data for Black Lives takes up the project of killability from the perspective of those who have been consigned to the margins of state protection. Yeshembet Milner, who founded the project, conceives of it as bringing together data scientists to use data differently. Data technologies have historically disenfranchised minority communities. As media studies, communications, and law scholars show, data that is fed into algorithms is often already biased, and the operation of algorithms that select for certain qualities often exacerbate these biases. In some recent egregious cases, and you can see the work of Safiya Noble, Algorithms of Oppression, for this argument, advertising algorithms have favored pornographied images of black women in simple searches for the term black girls. Predictive policing algorithms have targeted Latino and black men based on where they live and who they happen to be. And working class citizens have lost medical insurance coverage due to systemic errors. Milner conceives of the Data for Black Lives initiative as reversing these trends in algorithmic bias to produce a different kind of data. So one question that interests me is, how does one get to see in that way? How does one get to develop that optic? In situations where algorithmic protocols erase the particular histories of black communities, Data for Black Lives looks for ways to produce data that cannot be ignored. Milner's experience with this attunement to practices of data sovereignty began in Miami, where she worked with the Power University for Social Change to produce an analysis of black mothers' experience with breastfeeding in local hospitals. So this is how her ethic really got its start, through this localized project. Their procedures used mixed methods research performed under the leadership and oversight of black mothers to interview 300 women who had given birth at a Miami-Dade County hospital. The results showed that black mothers received hospital gift bags containing formula at a higher frequency than average, 89.1% compared to 57%, so that's a big difference, were less frequently shown breastfeeding techniques, 61% compared to 83%, and were asked less frequently if they had a breastfeeding plan, 59% as compared to 90%. So there's a pretty stark differences. Presented with this data that showed clear evidence of bias in treatment and advice about breastfeeding for black mothers, the county initiated new guidelines for teaching breastfeeding in hospitals. In Milner's work, a sovereign attunement means looking for the way a technical system presumes equality in how it treats people, taking up gaps in actual treatment and showing via the very means that produced these gaps in the first place that they exist, can yield hard to deny evidence that procedures need to change. These sovereign attunements make it possible for an ethical practice to turn towards how technical systems intersect with the decision to preserve some life at the cost of other life. Perfect. So from that starting point, the Data for Black Lives movement has gone on to start projects on tracing police harassment of minorities in cities. One of the biggest ones is being undertaken in New York City, where the police have a very bad record of releasing documents to the public under Freedom of Information Act requests. So this is a data collection and analysis project that is trying to produce different and meaningful data sets to minority communities. And I think it's one of the best sites to watch to look for the production of alternatives to the way that data sets and algorithmic governance are being deployed in general. So it's just kind of a plug for that. Okay. I have another case of sovereign attunements, which I won't discuss in the paper, but I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A, which is the Google protest against Project Maven, which was Google's drone strike project. And we can also talk there about how some of the architects of that movement, Lucy Suchman and Lily Irani, came to that ethical point of view. And to preview it, it's both through their work on human technological interfaces, and in Lily Irani's case, her identity as a person of Middle Eastern descent. And those two factors together actually produced a critique. So that attention to whose life is killable and whose life is protected is at the heart of what I'm calling sovereign attunements. So we're on to the conclusion, and then I have a little bit of, I hope you'll work with me, a hands-on exercise for us all. As a practice of training the self to become the kind of subject who can make an ethical decision, attunements may help us use effective noticing as a political and social gesture that maintains our cognizance of the erasures of modern technocultures that make some people killable and leave others perplexed in the face of their failed technological aspirations. At the same time, attunements maintain our memory of the kinds of pleasures we can find in working through our own glitches toward different possibilities. Many calls to technoethics recommend maintaining focus on the humans behind the algorithms as a pressure point. Making humans accountable for the algorithms they design shows that the biases algorithms produce are far from inevitable. However, an exclusive focus on humanness can also misfire. That is, the more blame for ethical failure is placed on one side of the human-technology equation, the more it might seem that either getting rid of the humans altogether might prevent ethical failures in the present, or elevating some humans to the position of social designers will solve these problems. Putting all of our ethical focus on the training of technicians to abide by regulations will always fall short, because technical systems have unpredictable results, and because technicians view the systems they build from a particular standpoint. Holding on to the human as uniquely blameworthy will only reinforce the utopian dream of elevating a class of experts above the race, class, and gendered digital workers scattered across the globe, at the same time that this dream's endpoint imagines transcending the human fallibility that causes ethical failures in the first place. Working through an effective attunement means asking digital laborers to think across a field marked by technically mediated decisions. It is precisely the instability of the relationship between algorithms and their designers, the glitch, the bodies, the open question of killability that makes such attunements possible. Technoaffect shifts ethics beyond narrow generalizations about the effect of technical systems, bringing into focus the multiple environments for living created through these systems. Technoethics, revitalized by technoaffects, reveals how a given attunement can stabilize and how it might be undone. When subjects' alignments with machines become disoriented, critical attention turns towards building the structures that make new orientations possible. And now for the zine part of the talk. just in the last minute. I don't think there's enough for everybody, but perhaps we can share with a partner. Take one, pass on. So what I'm passing out, this might be a little hard to do because I only have one pair of scissors, but we are going to put this one-page zine together. So what I'm taking you through now, I think, is one of the processes that we can become attuned to different ways of being in the world. It's someone knows how to do it already. Do you want to come up and demonstrate? Yes, please. Okay, and what's your name, please?
Dirk.
Hi, Dirk. Thank you.
I'm highly trained, as you can tell.
Please
Fold
follow
it,
Dirk's
hold
instructions.
the line a little bit better than I do.
Yeah.
Then you cut it in the
Well,
middle.
so you have to fold it again.
Oh, okay.
First fold it long ways, like this. We call this the hot dog fold. Yeah? Then please fold it short ways. Like this. Open it up. Yeah, that's fine. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. Yes. Very good. Then you'll have to borrow Dirk's scissors. I could only rustle up one pair. You make a cut to the middle, from the fold to the middle. You have to fold it short way this.
There you go. Your turn.
I say open it up again.
What is the next step?
Cut.
Cut. From the fold to the middle, so not all the way through. Yeah. Yes, he's got it.
Notice the fold. It's just for the fold to the middle.
Safety, careful.
No, you've got to.
Oh no.
We had to cut the wrong way.
Cut the wrong way. Nope. Okay. So you take it like this, unfold it. Okay? Unfold it. Fold it the short way. Unfold it one more time. Then fold these little ones halfway in. See, this is why it's attunement. It's actually work to get to the ethics. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. Should be even. Not cut.
We need a video. We need a video.
Okay? So you should have something that looks like this. You need some more folds. Just to have a guide. Yeah, that's it.
This is hard, like.
That's it. It's a little messy, but that's the aesthetic. It's a zine. Yeah? Pass the scissors around. Yeah. Yes, all fold. Perfect.
Like this?
Yeah, then make the snip.
Okay.
In half, yeah.
Just the
Perfect. It's still cut. Yeah. I'm gonna just.
And then we just hold it.
Snip. And then when you open it up, it will. Oh, you ripped it. Good.
We don't have enough. But then what do I do now? We need to change fold.
You need to make a little fold here and here, so that when it just becomes a pin.
Like both sides, right?
Then we can just then put it to have a struggle chapter.
Still do you want to do the other fold or
No,
not?
you can go.
After you do the fold, then unfold it. Fold it so. One point of this is it only takes one piece of paper. It's not complicated.
sticky tape over there? You want sticky tape over there? She's bringing sticky tape. But then we won't be able to read the words.
Well, as long as it's clear. Is it sellotape or?
No. You got see-through tape? Oh, no. We blew it. We're getting it. We need a bunch of kindergartners in here.
Exactly.
We're away.
Let me also say that you can go on YouTube and show yourself a video of that. You can also make the cuts first and the folds first and then hand draw. This was a scene I made in collaboration with a very talented person named Roberto Lara Guzman, who did the layout. If it were me, I would have done this first and written it by hand and photocopy. But this is much cuter. So you can, and there's a color illustration of the bees that you can find on on the Data and Society Medium site that's called Points, if you look up the title. So that was just a kind of fun exercise in the work of attunement. There's lots of ways to achieve it. This is one of them. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm going to end the presentation with that. Thank you. Yeah, enjoy yourself. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. I enjoyed it very much. I want to ask you about your main concept, attunement. It's a concept that means a lot to me, but perhaps it means something slightly different from the way you're using it. I come from phenomenology, and their attunement would also be an effective concept, like you also described it. But nonetheless, I see some differences, and perhaps you could expand a bit upon that and clarify how you use the concept of attunement. So, in phenomenology, attunement would be, from Heidegger, the basic mode of emplacement, right? So the attunement, the Befindlichkeit, is where you find yourself somehow in the world, usually by means of a mood. So the mood of anxiety or fear or whatever emplaces you somehow in the world. And then certain phenomenologists, Levinas, and going into a critical phenomenology, would say, well, these pathic attunements, these affective attunements also have an ethical quality to them that actually reveals an ethical problem in the world. And now I'm a bit unsure of the way you're using attunement, if the attunement also reveals the ethical problem in the world, or if the glitch merely kind of disturbs us and then throws us back upon ourselves, and then we begin to wonder what is something wrong in the world. So in the example from the canteen, the worker notices the loss of sound, or this sound that she was used to is no longer there. That makes her reflect, well, why is it not there? It's because it's plastic cutlery and we just throw it away. Now that's a problem for another reason than the lack of sound, right? So the lack of sound shows something, but not the ethical problem as such. The ethical problem is something that you discover afterwards. And I think probably it's the same with the Zuckerberg situation, and probably it's also the same with the discriminatory treatments of new mothers, right? So they have different regimes of how to educate breastfeeding and so on, right? So does the attunement actually let us experience an ethical problem, or does the attunement merely show that something is out of whack and we have different standards to evaluate the ethical problem?
Closer to the latter. That's a great question. So I think the way that attunement is used in Kathleen Stewart's work, it's much closer to something like an atmosphere or maybe a situation in which it allows us to notice that something is amiss, but it doesn't automatically carry with it the ethical charge. The ethical charge comes really out of those 3 steps that I laid out at the beginning through Nesargi Dave's work, which is critique, alternatives, and then practice, creative reappropriation. So yeah, I think it is different. I think part of what I'm trying to show and what I was trying to show in this zine making thing was that moving from an attunement to an ethical practice requires labor of some kind, requires reiterated labor.
Thank you for talking up.
You're very welcome, and thank you for getting me, asking Jared to get me some water. That's what I need to do to talk up.
Early in your talk, you mentioned the possibility of a Hippocratic Oath for data scientists. What would that oath be composed of? Who would administer it? Would it be a prerequisite to getting a job?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on it?
Yeah, I would be happy to. The Hippocratic Oath is an idea that several people in Silicon Valley who are concerned about ethics have suggested. One of them is Tristan Harris, who runs something called the Time Well Spent Initiative Institute something. And the question you ask is precisely one of the problems with that idea. It hasn't really been fleshed out enough to have a body. There's no guild structure behind it that could administer it, make sure it was being used properly, and answer all those questions. So that's one of the issues with many of these ideas. They get thrown out, but without much thought to the governance infrastructure that would need to support them. Yes, please.
So we've been working with a group of Fortune 500 companies in a corporate context on how to do data analysis on employee data, right? Which is in some ways even more sensitive than consumer data.
Yeah.
And the thing that we came out with after about 5 months of work together with about 2,000 companies was that a key principle, there's 10 principles, but a key principle is anything you do with employee data in the end has to be for the benefit, specific benefit of the employees. If you cannot state the specific benefit, you probably should stay away from it as an analyst or as a project. And that to me kind of brought home the ethical principle. And I guess the thing that I wonder about attunement is whether that's something that society teaches us. So it depends on what cultural environment you come from, or whether it's deeply ingrained in human nature, so to speak. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I do. To build on what you first said, which I think is very interesting, much of the employee data, which you could also think of as workplace surveillance, much of the arguments for that are framed as beneficial to the employee. They're often sold to the employee that way, especially biometric indicators.
I think the way you're putting it is already judging sold to employees. I think the way that I would put it is there is great good that can come from using biometric and other data.
Yeah.
You can design workspaces to be better for the employees.
Yes.
You can design careers for employees by
Yes.
connecting them to others.
Yes.
And so I think it all comes from what's the intent and purpose, and does it follow these ethical principles?
I agree with you. There is potentially great value. I don't think it's just a question of intent. It's also a question of the problems to which the data is put and how one thinks about those problems. So a really good example is a sweat vest. A sweat vest is widely used in the NFL to measure the performance of football players, which is a way to make predictions about the longevity of their careers. It's not really in the interest of the employee who is the football player. However, a sweat vest could be used in the interest of farm laborers to measure their well-being when they're picking fruit and vegetable, but it's not deployed in that way. So I think I'm not really judging, I'm describing what the current status is, and I would like to move us more towards the other status. On the question of whether attunement is innate in human nature or culturally learned, I think all the attunements that I described actually come from what you were talking about, a feeling of lack of fit, a feeling of the way in which the difference between how we are socialized and how we feel in different situations of that socialization. So a really good thinker to think with on this is the earlier work of Judith Butler, where she talks very clearly about how in the moment in which we're born and the doctor says it's a girl or it's a boy, there's already a social category and then a body that never perfectly encompasses or captures boyhood or girlhood, no matter how many dresses we wear and long hair we have. Some more questions? Yeah.
Could you expand on the drone example?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know how much familiarity there is in the room with Project Maven. Project Maven was a project within Google to support drone technology for the military. And then a number of researchers within and outside of Google protested Project Maven, and eventually they were successful in having Google stop pursuing that project. And so the organizers of those protests include people who work for Google and now sometimes don't, and stopped working for Google after a while. There's a scholar named Lily Irani, and then another scholar named Lucy Suchman, who works on the human technology interface in drone technologies. And so my argument, which when the paper comes out, I hate to say, you can read about it there, it sounds really pompous, but what I mean to say is I do a much better job of explaining it in the paper. The way that they think about what populations get protected and what populations are killable came out of their work. So when Lucy talks about how she joined the protest against Project Maven, she talks about reading an article in the New York Times about drone warfare that pointed out that the soldiers running the drones were away from the battlefield and therefore safer. And because she had this long-standing project on military battlefield simulations, which are very, very realistic, they use a lot of virtual reality, she immediately thought about the populations that weren't being protected. So it was her ability to think across those sites. And for Lily, she's of Iranian descent, to think about the Middle East of a particular being a particular place of killability that produced an ethical response in the form of this movement. Sorry, it's a little, I didn't explain it that well, but okay.
So there are a number of people in the room who are data science students, and other people in the room who are very interested in thinking about a curriculum for teaching students in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so it's very easy to imagine what a class on ethics looks like if you're teaching that pie chart that you put up there.
Yes.
Or the 10 principles of AI ethics or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's more difficult to imagine, although certainly not impossible because it's happening in other disciplines, how to teach data scientists to become attuned or attunable or whatever, however we might want to say that.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping that you could maybe say something about what the differences might be and what it might look like to teach young people to become attunable beings.
Mm-hmm. I would say everyone is an attunable being. It's just a question of what you're tuned to. But I have some ideas on that. I can get you started a little bit here, and we can take it further later, but one thing that I would really like to see is more history. History about previous moments in the history of computing where people have wrestled with ethical questions. They might have something to teach us. Also, history of things that fall out of the pie chart, such as labor and immigration history in the United States. Thirdly, I would like to see curriculum that looks towards, and this is a very anthropological take, other places outside Europe and the US where alternative technological solutions are being practiced and tried out. I mean, Felipe was telling me about solar servers, solar data servers. Where is that being developed? Who are developing these alternatives? What can we bring to the center from places that are considered peripheral? I think those are at least some of the ways that people can become attuned, but it would require moving towards disciplines like Asian American history or gender studies, places where we generally don't look for ethics. But what those disciplines provide is a sense that the solutions that we're looking for, they have started in the world, and we're looking in the wrong places, temporally and geographically.
So let me start by saying I don't know what I'm talking about, and let me push back a little and say.
Sure.
So I was actually thinking exactly what Jerry was thinking, because we're part of the same enterprise here. Of how do we best teach attunement?
Yeah.
And when you mention looking at the history, what worries me is that there doesn't seem to be any comparable history. And maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but I just feel that some of the things, you can be attuned to one aspect, but then when you, and maybe it's just a pragmatic and wrong way of thinking, when you you layer other forms of data on top of something that already exists, you couldn't have possibly been attuned until that had actually happened. You just can't possibly perceive ahead of time that this data was even going to be available, or this problem or this ethical issue would actually arise. And those are the sort of problems we're faced with now, and I can't, in my own mind at least, come up with an analogy that existed, for example, prior in the world of computing. You know, I think about it sort of prior, we just sort of created plumbing. Now, data is kind of the soul of this thing, and it's really sort of, you know, it's indeterminate.
I think someone wants to answer the question.
Please,
I think so. So my colleague used to work at Cisco, and the way he put it is, put yourself into the situation. If this was the data about you, or analysis about you, how would you feel about it? Because even though you're right, there's lots of data elements, lots of analyses that we've never had in the past, so there's no historic comparison. If you put yourself into it, there's always an automatic compass that you have, whether it feels right.
No, I mean, I think that's good. I mean, that's essentially what you said before with your other example, and I can see the value in that, absolutely. I guess I'm not convinced that covers all the bases, but
Fair point.
Can I also say
Oh,
something?
good.
Referring to your prior example, I would agree with Phil on this, that it's a little too simple to say put yourself into and imagine, because what if oneself was one who wasn't exposed to the sorts of things that Sareeta was mentioning and all others. And so, for example, with your previous example, it sounds very nice to say something like what benefits the workers, but when one's idea of what benefits the workers is so narrowly conceived, it totally excludes any other possibilities of thinking otherwise about what might benefit workers in ways that go way beyond something like more comfortable office space or 401k retirement plan that could go belly up just at the right time or the wrong time. So I think something like what Sareeta was suggesting, unlike a principle or rule-based or checklist approach to ethics where the idea is we know the answers, it's just a matter of checking off the rules beforehand, one develops a sense of how to attune to situations that pop up newly in our worlds, whatever they might be, because ethics is always this kind of uncertainty, this risk of the unknown that we need to attune to. So anyway.
I would agree with that. And on the history piece, I'm not suggesting a one-to-one analog or corollary, but what I am saying is that we actually do not know enough about the forms of world organizing that have existed across historical and geographic time to have that quiver of tools that we could deploy in these new emergent situations. Quiver of arrows, I guess. Tool belts. Tool belts.
Me?
Yeah, does someone who hasn't asked a question want to ask before? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I'm trying to figure out how attunement might be different from socialization. And I think linked to that is very different. How implicit is attunement? Is it mostly tacit knowledge? Is it this moral compass that we sort of feel and know but can't really articulate?
It's very different than socialization. Socialization is a relationship between an individual and a field of action and interaction in which we understand how to operate in that field by learning the kinds of behavior that are accepted and prohibited within it. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about attunement. It's actually not tacit. It's actually the coming together of material, social, embodied circumstances around a particular set of issues or concerns. So it's more transient, but it's also more apparent to consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think I would say that socialization also includes how to learn what matters and how to think.
Yeah, socialization is learning how what matters and how to think, but attunement is much more closely related to learning the boundaries of what you've been socialized into. Learning where your socialization doesn't match up with reality anymore. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, that's lovely. So would you say that an individual is attuned or can a group be attuned?
Yeah, I think a group can be attuned, but it takes collective effort. In terms of building relationality among the members of a group in order to surface what people might be noticing, might be sensing. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. It was very thought-provoking. My question would be, so when you take the time off from your presentation to actually have us make a zine, you were actually demonstrating how that cultivation of ethics would take place. So my question would be taking it out of this room and putting it into real world. So these tech sectors are really bound with time constraints and profitability constraints and so on and so forth. So how would you what would be the ways of reconciling that cultivation of ethics with the boundaries of the real world that these tech sectors operate?
Yeah. What I would think through there are actually existing cases. So I really like to think with the Tech Workers Coalition, which is a coalition of tech workers who are extremely time-bound and still somehow manage to do all these crazy things, reading circles, protesting, meeting with labor unions, and of course, we can't have the expectation that everyone can do that to the same degree. And that way it's also collective. So for some months maybe you do it, then you have other commitments. I show up and start doing the work. I think that's more what I'm imagining. Yeah, but I take your point. I mean, I don't want everyone to leave this room thinking, I've got to go start my own zine press now, and that's the way the world is going to change. I mean, there's many routes, and we shouldn't add more virtuous labor on top of all the labor we're already performing. That's not the point. Yes.
So can I pose a follow-up question?
Please.
So these collective commitments. So what would you think the role of the trust is among these like.
You mean the data trust? Are we talking about data trust?
No, more like in the process of building these like collective commitment circles.
Oh, trust.
Trust,
As,
yeah.
as relation.
Yeah, like
yeah.
the role of trust in these relationalities and how to build that. So like,
Seems important. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm searching for an answer, so like, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, I think trust is a fragile undertaking that has to be always renewed. Right? And it has to work through relationality and work through conflict. Trust established by bracketing out conflict won't produce the kind of ethical impulses that we're interested in. Maybe that's one way to start thinking about it. Yes, Samuel.
Thank you very much. My question is a bit about how attunement leads to that second step of critique, and how, what potentially the limits of that are, both on a personal level but also on a more collective level, if we're dealing with these data-driven technologies that, like recommender systems that are very adaptive, often very opaque as well. So say we are attuned to what is lacking in a given situation. Do you think that these kind of technologies actually limit our ability to then formulate critique, articulate what kind of reaction should come out of what we realize through attunement, notice through attunement, and how can we collect those messages?
So I hear two separate issues. One is, do the technologies limit our ability to formulate critique? The second question is, do the technologies limit our ability to act or imagine things otherwise once we've formulated that critique? Is that fair? Or are you asking a third question?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I mean,
Okay.
So say we're in a situation and we're using a recommender system, and from our perspective or our position that we have in the world, we realize that something is amiss, is out of place, out of tune.
Yeah.
But we don't understand the system, we can't quite capture its complexity. So how do we get from that realized or that experience of attunement to the next step of critique?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, in all the cases that I presented, there is a way in which, through conversation with others who are noticing the same issue, through collecting other sorts of data, I mean, there's a real pragmatics here too, through understanding the decisions that are made when something gets designed, by following the results of the algorithm. See, the algorithm may be opaque. We could spend a lot of money trying to open that black box. I mean, energy. I'm fading. A lot of energy opening that black box, but we can also trace the effects of the algorithm. Through doing the painstaking work of tracing, that's how we move to critique. I think it's a research, different data set, tracing effects, looking for alternatives. All of those projects, they may feel, in a sense, pointless because it seems like the other side, however you want to formulate it, is monopolistic or too big or something. But actually, I think those are the things that will allow us to move to critique. That's done. Okay, thank you.